This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute investment, legal, or tax advice. Listening does not create an advisory relationship. Friends Fiduciary is a sponsor of this podcast. Sponsorship does not constitute an endorsement, and we do not receive compensation based on listener investment decisions.
How do we reorient ourselves towards community and towards relationships that we can nurture each other outside of this very extractive economy? Instead of just how do we just make a lot of money and then use it to get our needs met? How do we do something different?
We have to work within the parameters that we have, but I think we can still affect change within companies with the tools that we have.
A mix of the grounding in faith and the pragmatic and practical approach of business, and the combination of those two. I don't think they always have to be at odds.
How do I start to overcome this sense of otherness, this huge clash of otherness that we experience around class? And then it's just exacerbated tenfold if you get into the global south.
I'm Peterson, Toscano.
And I'm Yañez.
This is Season 6, Episode 2 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation.
Now that we've laid the groundwork in our intro, we're ready to dive into the 4 major themes that will define this season. We're looking at how our faith can actually transform our relationship with money.
We're starting today with relational finance, this idea of a priesthood of all believers, economics, where we stop leaving money to the experts and start sharing financial power. From here, we'll be moving into the dissonance, that friction between our Quaker testimonies and the reality of a global capitalist system.
And later this season, we'll look at reparative economics, exploring how meetings can move from simple charity to the active repair of historical harms. And finally, we'll look at systemic stewardship, where we balance our own personal money biographies with the collective power of impact investing.
Diana, as someone who is easily overwhelmed by money matters, I'm trusting you to keep me from bolting right now.
Don't worry. I specialize in working with the financially skittish. We're going to take it slow. You've got this.
Okay.
This season of Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee and Friends Fiduciary. Now, we have 2 important notes of transparency for this episode. First, since I started this project, I've actually joined the board at Friends Fiduciary.
Congratulations. And second, while Friends Fiduciary is a sponsor of this podcast, they have no editorial input into our content.
That's right, Peterson. And today I want to talk about relational finance. This idea of shifting toward a priesthood of all believers economics, where financial power isn't just for experts.
Well, Diana, I'm a skeptic here. When I hear finance, I think of a machine designed to extract profit. Seriously, can you really have a relationship with a global system that causes so much inequality? Or is it relational finance like, greenwashing, or just a nice name for capitalism with a better PR team?
Yeah, I know. I hear your concerns. My years of studying finance and money say otherwise. First, let's start by looking at how we define the economy. I spoke with Nathan Klaben, who works with Right Sharing of World Resources. He argues that the system feels like a machine because we've been told it's too complex for us to understand.
How do we reorient ourselves towards community and towards relationships that we can nurture each other outside of this very extractive economy? Instead of just how do we just make a lot of money and then use it to get our needs met? How do we do something different? I am interested in how people get their needs met and how people express their gifts and their vocations. And that's what the economy is, the household. It's generally been about people in their local communities determining what their needs are because they're the experts in their own lives.
Okay, the household. I like that. But if I'm in a global household and my bank is investing in things I hate, why shouldn't I just take my ball and go home? Why not just divest and stay pure?
No, I hear where you're coming from, but purity really might be an illusion. I asked Amy Carr, the senior shareholder advocate at Friends Fiduciary, about that. She spends her days talking to big corporations, and she sees ownership as a tool for change rather than a mark of guilt.
Most of my work is talking to companies about their impacts on people and planet. It's the companies that we hold that make it through our screening processes, but that we can push to be doing better work or having less negative impacts. And so a lot of the work that I do, the shareholder advocacy work, is getting dialogues with companies when we see an issue of concern and then using the tools available in shareholder advocacy to escalate on a certain issue if we think it's important. So that includes filing shareholder resolutions. It's a way to raise an issue internally within a company to the board level. There's back and forths around the right way to approach an issue, what the actual impacts of the issue is, and how best for a company to address it. Because we do always engage on various issues, whether it's environmental or social issues or governance issues. And so having the most up-to-date information and understanding, what is a reasonable ask for companies? What can companies be doing more? So we have to work within the parameters that we have. But I think we can still affect change within companies with the tools that we have.
Yeah, I don't know, Diana. That still feels like we're playing by their rules. Why spend time in a boardroom if the system itself is the problem?
Because someone has to hold the door open for those who aren't in the room. It's important to continue the conversation and to build alternatives to our current power over economics. Tracy Jeltz-Sullivan, the executive director of Right Sharing of World Resources, explained to me that the real power isn't in the boardroom, it's in the partnership between equals.
How do I start to overcome this sense of otherness, this huge clash of otherness that we experience around class? And then it's just exacerbated tenfold if you get into the global south. How can I get over my white saviorism and feel like I'm really doing this in partnership? We are in the middle of a power shift, power sharing with our country coordinators much more dramatically to actually make changes because they recommended it. We have a very clear philosophy and methodology. Is it informed by Quakerism? We have a spiritual commitment to that comes out of being Quakers. There's a lot of good people who are working on decolonization levels and who's got a voice and who's got power and how can we really do this. Being a Quaker might help us stay committed to the work, but there's a lot of other people doing that work.
Okay. That's starting to sound like a true priesthood of all believers. But how? How do we bridge the gap between that great grassroots work and the giant institutional funds that Quakers hold?
Well, it comes back to taking responsibility. Jeff Perkins, the former executive director of Friends Fiduciary, told me that Quakers have always been unmediated. We don't let anyone stand between us and the truth, including our money.
The fact that we can have a direct and immediate, unmediated experience with the divine ourselves. We don't need a preacher or priest to moderate our interactions with what I call God, others call divine or spirit. Friends Fiduciary started rather small and limited in its service area and grew. When they hired me, the board had a clear mandate of wanting to increase the assets under management. I took that to heart as a Quaker, wanting to see every Quaker organization invest consistent with their values. Simple proposition. Friends Fiduciary might not be right for every organization, but every quick organization ought to be investing consistent with their values.
So the relationship is also about us supporting each other. But I still feel this spiritual burden. If we have more than we need, how do we fix that relationship?
Nathan Clavin says it starts by realizing that getting mine doesn't actually make me safe.
Individual accumulation will not save you. And so how do we reorient ourselves towards community and towards relationships that we can nurture each other outside of this very extractive economy? Instead of just how do we just make a lot of money and then use it to get our needs met? How do we do something different? But it's definitely been a path of what is right relationship, or what does being in partnership or solidarity, or what does struggling together look like in practice and not just in the words we use.
Struggling together in practice. I like that. It makes it sound less like a spreadsheet and more like, a meeting for worship.
Relational finance isn't a final answer. It's a commitment to stay in the struggle and to walk with each other. In this next episode, we'll dive further into the dissonance between Quaker values and what we see in the financial world. Or in other words, how do Quakers navigate late-stage, heteronormative, patriarchal, ableist capitalism?
All right, so we're really going there.
When it comes to money, we can't just take our ball and go home. We're all in this together.
Well, this episode, we've been talking about relational finance. How can we move from seeing money as an abstract expert system to seeing it as the fiber of our community?
And if you want to go deeper into how Quakers have wrestled with this, we highly recommend checking out the December 2015 issue of Friends Journal. The theme was economic justice and poverty, and it gets right into the heart of the priesthood of all believers in our wallets.
There's one article in particular by J. Jandai Harrell titled Talk Less, Do More. Jandai doesn't pull any punches. He asks if our committees and reading groups are actually changing the lives of people in our neighborhoods, or if they're just decorations for our conscience.
He makes a powerful point that relational finance isn't a therapy session. He challenges us to move from theory to tangible things like small business funding, green technology, and entrepreneurship that empowers families. It's about whom we invest in, not just what.
Another standout from that same issue is Pamela Haynes' piece, Yes, It Does Take a Village. Pamela reflects on how our current economic system tries to make us feel like we're all on our own, competing for scarce resources.
Pamela reminds us that the priesthood of all believers applies to how we take care of each other's needs, whether it's sharing tools, childcare, financial support, or housing when I've stayed at her house. She argues that the village model is actually the most resilient economy we have. It's about building a web of mutual reliance rather than individual security.
You can find both of those articles, along with the full December 2015 archive at friendsjournal.org. We'll also put direct links in our show notes at quakerstoday.org. Now, Diana, you brought along a resource from outside the Friends Journal archives, and I have to admit, when I first saw the title, I thought it was a joke. I mean, you're actually recommending the Jennifer Aniston movie Friends with Money?
Well, I am. And I'm promising it's not just me looking for an excuse to talk about rom-coms.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can see you're really trying to help me understand this topic where I am. Thank you.
Well, even though it's a Hollywood movie, it's one of the best depictions of the money dissonance we're talking about this season. The story follows 4 longtime friends. 3 are very wealthy, and 1, played by Jennifer Aniston, who is struggling financially.
Yeah. I remember this awkwardness when they go out to dinner and some people want the expensive wine and, well, Aniston's character, she's counting her pennies for an appetizer.
Right. And this is exactly what relational finance is trying to heal. In the movie, money creates an unspoken wall. The wealthy friends feel guilty or pitying, and the struggling friend feels resentful and even invisible. They are friends with money, but the money is actually what's keeping them from being truly in relationship.
Yeah. So it's a study in disparity. But how does that help us understand the Quaker perspective?
Well, think back to what Tracy Jelt Sullivan said about the spiritual burden of having too much. In the film, you see that burden clearly. The wealthy characters are actually quite miserable and disconnected.
Okay. And the priesthood of all believers part?
This film really shows us what happens when we don't have that. When we treat money as a secret or a source of shame, we can't have a global household. We just have a bunch of individuals hiding behind their bank accounts. Watching this movie through a Quaker lens asks the question, how would these relationships change if they practiced right sharing instead of just having money?
Wow, who knew? I never thought I'd be using Jennifer Aniston to understand economic justice, but I see it, I do. It's about breaking down the walls that disparity builds between us.
Right. It's a great conversation starter for a meeting or a study group. You can find Friends with Money on most streaming platforms. It's a funny and actually quite painful look at the reality of money in our relationships.
Well, listener, Diana and I have covered a lot of ground today. We started with the idea that finance doesn't have to be a cold, expert-driven machine. It can be a global household.
Yes, whether it's through the grassroots partnership models I write sharing of world resources or the active ownership Amy Carr and Jeff Perkins talked about, the theme is the same. Stay in the relationships. Don't let those so-called externalities stay invisible.
Some people just give, and that's the extent of their engagement. We're hoping to engage them in more and in different ways beyond just giving money, or not even about giving money, but how do we look at our own lives and our own communities and our own relationships? Where is transformation possible?
Part of the conversations I have with companies is not only representing Quaker values, but also the business case for the Quaker values. While I'm highlighting diversity conversations, it's important to us. Equality is important. Having everyone represented is important. But also there's studies that show financial performance of more diverse boards financially perform better.
A mix of the grounding in faith and the pragmatic and practical approach of business, and the combination of those two. I don't think they always have to be at odds.
I actually wish we talked about our faith more with each other. It's about being willing to be transformed and lead lives of more integrity and community.
As we suggested with our movie pick today, it starts with simply breaking the silence. If we want a priesthood of all believers in our economics, we have to start by being honest with each other about what we have and what we need.
Right. We want to hear from you as we move through this season. What does relational finance look like in your life or your meeting? Does the idea of the global household feel empowering, or does it feel like a heavy burden?
And do you have any recommendations for us? Another rom-com, a game, an app? Send us your thoughts, your stories, or your questions about Quaker values and money. You can leave us a voicemail by calling 317-Quakers. That's 317-782-5377. +1 if you're calling from outside the USA. 317-Quakers. You can also email us, podcast@friendsjournal.org.
For show notes, transcripts, and more episodes, go to quakerstoday.org.
Season 6 of Quakers Today is sponsored by Friends Fiduciary. Friends Fiduciary unites Quaker values with expert investing. They serve more than 460 organizations with ethical portfolios, shareholder advocacy, and a deep commitment to justice and sustainability. In the 2025-26 proxy season, their outreach to more than 40 companies resulted in over 30 companies engaging in dialogue, and they filed 16 shareholder resolutions. From ethical business practices to advancing equity, Friends Fiduciary builds a better future through values-driven investing. Learn more at friendsfiduciary.org.
Season 6 is also sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee. The American Friends Service Committee is a Quaker organization that promotes a world free of violence, inequality, and oppression. Guided by the Quaker belief in the divine light within each person, AFSC works with people of all faiths and backgrounds to challenge unjust systems and promote lasting peace. Learn more at afsc.org.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Next month, we'll be leaning into the dissonance, exploring that tension between our deepest values and the traditional financial systems we live in every day.
Until then, walk gently and be mindful of the paths your money takes.